How do I decide if a flight is a good deal? I'll tell you right now, I've never been one to play the points game, even though I have used points. But for me, telling if a flight is a good deal really is if a flight is a good fit for the travels that I need to be doing and if it's in my budget. There's a couple other factors I'll talk about, but let's start with the one about being a good fit. So, a good deal for me is not always about the price, it's about getting to my destination on time and also at the time that I need, the day that I need, the location I need. And sometimes that may not be the cheapest flight, but I find that paying a little bit more to get myself to a place at the time I want in the location I want is worth paying a little bit more money. And to me, that is a good deal. So a lot of times people talk about flight deals and they focus on the money. I really don't think that's the only thing. Another factor that I look at, of course, is budget. And with budget, I try not to spend too much money on flights. Everybody loves a good deal for a flight price, but the reality is a lot of airlines have not so hidden fees. You buy your ticket, then you have to buy your seat, then you have to buy your carry-on, then you have to buy your check bag, then you got to buy your food on the plane. There's so many hidden fees with the flight that flights can get expensive pretty fast. I know for me going in, I set a budget and I set my expectations for what I want from the flight. And that usually means that I have a bag going on board as a carry-on, not just a personal item, and I get to select my seat in advance. I'm not the kind of person who likes to play roulette with your seats and just get assigned one last minute or, check right before you get on the plane and see if there's any open windows or empty aisles. It stresses me out, and paying up front to not have to deal with that stress is well worth it to me, and I think it's a good deal. Something else I look at when I'm looking for a good deal with an airline is the airline itself. There are budget carriers that, yes, I have flown, and they're not great. I've had very interesting experiences with budget airlines. Way back in the day before there were a lot of headlines about unruly passengers on planes. The first truly budget airline I ever flew, we hadn't even left the airport, and I think it was either 2 or 3 officers come on board, take somebody off. It was wild and not something I care to experience again. Granted, that can happen on any airline. I do feel it's a little bit more common with budget airlines, but I might be a little biased. All to be said, I know what I'm getting into with budget airlines. There's quite a few you've heard of in Europe as well. I'm sure I won't name names, but I find if I can get a flight that is the time frame I want, in the budget I want, including my bag, my seat, then it's a good deal. I go into the flight knowing what to expect. Budget airlines are crazy, and I think they've taken it a little too far. I will not get into that, but the airline is another thing to consider. I don't mind spending a little bit more money if it's a airline that I know I'm gonna have a good experience on. This happens all the time, especially for my transatlantic flights. There's 1 or 2 airlines that they're the only airlines I fly. Non-negotiable with me. There's obviously other reasons that go into that, including loyalty and blah, 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 and status and all that. But airlines are another thing that I consider when I'm trying to decide if a flight deal is a good deal. There's other things too you can think about if it's a good deal. I've turned into one of those people who I am a nonstop flight person. If you don't know the difference between a nonstop and a direct, and then go educate yourself. A nonstop flight means you're on the plane and the next stop is your destination. A direct flight, you can possibly stop but not get off the plane. So people get that all confused all the time, but I have turned into a person who I'm a nonstop person. I want on the plane, I want off the plane. At least for my long haul flights. All that to be said, you can look at a flight and decide if it's a good deal based on the number of changes, number of layovers. Sometimes they're not anything you can avoid, or perhaps it's the other way and you choose to have additional layovers and changes because flying through a certain airport can be a struggle there, or you do it because of the seasons and you don't want to fly through an airport that could potentially be stuck in a winter storm. As a good example of this for me is when I'm flying across the US. I have a couple flights a year or a couple trips a year where the flights, it makes the most sense for me to fly south and fly through somewhere like Phoenix or Texas versus flying north and flying through somewhere like Chicago because weather. It happens. It's not a big deal, but I try to avoid those things. But the flip side of that is if I fly through the South for this one trip, I either have to fly through Dallas, which quite frankly always gets backed up and delayed and canceled. It's just kind of a roll the dice with them. Or I fly through Phoenix, which is never been a problem for an airport as that I've had with my travels. But it means I have two additional flights. So it's just, it's kind pick your battles, I guess. The flights are about the same cost, but to me, it's a better deal to have the additional changes and the additional planes. It's all personal preference at the end of the day. These are just things that I've experienced and things that I've learned over the years, things that I look for. So by all means, you take it or leave it. I'll never know unless you drop into the comments. Trying to think of some other things that I think that I look at when I'm looking at airlines or flights. Another big one is the airport, that the origin airport. If you're in a location that has multiple options for airports, sometimes it makes sense to go a little bit out of your way for a better flight deal. Price wise, sometimes it makes more sense to stay close, and sometimes again, it's just personal preference. If you prefer the convenience of being going to the airport that is closer to you, then that's the flight you should take. Again, this isn't all about money. This is about your travel experience. This is about reducing travel stress. And also, sometimes going to the airport that's farther, even though the flight itself might cost less, by the time you pay for transportation, it might not be. So look at all your costs, look at all these factors, decide what works the best for you, and then choose which deal is a deal based on your definition. Again, it's not all about the money. It would be easier if it was all about the money and everybody was the same across the board. You just decided who would cost the least, and that's who you're gonna choose. But unfortunately, it's not that way, and just kind of you gotta muddle through it. But I promise it gets easier and more like second nature the more you do this. So I will stop rambling. As always, excited to have you here, and I will catch you on the next one.